Hey, it's April 15th, and this is your COVID-19 news update. Some good news today from Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Theresa Tam. She said data shows that the number of cases in Canada is doubling at a slower rate compared to last month. This is a sign that the curve is possibly starting to flatten. The doubling rate here now is 10 days as opposed to 3 days. Also today, Justin Trudeau said that the Canada Emergency Response Benefit will be open to people earning $1,000 a month or less, which is good news for people like gig economy workers and seasonal workers who may have had work cut because of COVID-19. And lastly, Donald Trump is facing major blowback since he announced that the U.S. is suspending funding to the World Health Organization, pending a review. Business leaders and diplomats are warning that a funding cut from the U.S., which is a major donor, could jeopardize the global response to the pandemic. Okay, on to today's episode. So it feels like overnight, video conferencing apps have become a major part of our day-to-day lives. And Zoom is probably the biggest one. Anything we want to do has moved to this app, whether it's a work meeting, a workout class, or just a hangout with our friends. And as the app's user base has exploded, there's been more and more scrutiny around it, with experts raising concerns about the app's security and asking questions about how we should be using it. Today, my guest is Bill Marczak. He's a senior research fellow at Citizen Lab, a technology and human rights research group at the University of Toronto, and he's going to take us through everything you need to know about Zoom. I'm Tamara Kandaker, and you're listening to Wait, There's More. Bill, hi. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
So we're talking about Zoom today, and I just want to start with the basics. What is Zoom, and what was it used for before this pandemic?
Well, Zoom is a tech startup that has a product for video conferencing. So this allows companies, if there's people sitting around in a meeting room, talking to other people in that company in a different location in their meeting room, or people at home, or people traveling abroad, mainly designed for companies to keep in touch with each other and conduct online meetings.
And how does a Zoom meeting work for people who haven't used it? Can you take me through the process of setting one up or joining one and just explain some of the features that Zoom has?
Well, so interestingly, joining a Zoom meeting is actually quite easy. The whole platform is designed to be very easy to use, very quick to use, and very painless and frictionless for users to use. It's pretty much all in the name Zoom. So how you join a Zoom meeting, there will be some sort of meeting identifier, which will be 9 digits or 10 digits, sort of like a phone number. And then you'll pop open the Zoom app on your computer or on your phone, or you can call in from, one of those sophisticated enterprise conferencing systems in a meeting room in a building somewhere. But basically, you just type in this meeting ID and you join. Some meetings, you have the option, although Zoom is trying to push this mandatory now, to set up a password for the meeting so that once you type in the meeting code, you'll have to also type in a password, and then essentially you're in.
So a lot of us, myself included, hadn't heard of Zoom until about a month ago when we all went on lockdown. And that's when a lot of us started using it for the first time to hang out with our friends or started seeing people post screenshots of their Zoom calls. And now people are using Zoom for all kinds of things. Can you take me through some of the new ways that you've seen Zoom be used in the last little while?
Yeah, so because of the whole coronavirus pandemic, a lot of our interactions that previously happened in the real world are now mediated through Zoom. So, just to give you kind of like a little personal anecdote here, when the lockdown started, I had never heard of Zoom. And then all of a sudden, work meetings are happening on Zoom.
I use it for one-to-one client meetings. I use it for client groups, so groups of up to 50 people if you have the basic Zoom plan. And I also do it for online workshops.
Conference calls with friends are happening on Zoom. We're sitting around drinking beers.
Like a Zoom party. Allison and I are going to be drinking some margs. I'm
playing trivia on Zoom. My doctor wants to meet on Zoom.
On my personal meeting room, When the patient is ready.
I hear about friends having appointments with their therapists on Zoom. There's just this whole range of uses. I think their user base jumped something like 10 times or 20 times from before the coronavirus pandemic to during the coronavirus pandemic. They went from, I think, maybe 10 million to 200 million Zoom users or something like that. So it's a big boost in traffic.
Yeah, and now there are these hilarious videos going viral of Zoom fails, like this woman who was in a work meeting and brought her laptop into the bathroom and filmed herself peeing by accident when she thought the camera was off.
What happened?
I saw nothing.
Oh my God. Poor Jennifer.
Well, so I saw the Saturday Night Live sketch that satirized some of those. It is funny because people who have never used this technology before are now using it, and there's all these questions of etiquette, all these questions of, well, do I need to wear pants on a Zoom call? Probably not, but then what if I get up and, the camera shows me walking, and you see my underwear? There's all these different, things that you sort of have to consider.
In fact, this suit, this is the first time I've worn anything other than sweatpants since March 11th. My wife had to help me put it on because I forgot how buttons work.
Yeah, I saw a lot of people use Zoom over this weekend to celebrate Passover, Easter with their friends. I even saw a wedding on Zoom, which is pretty crazy.
All right, well, thank you all for coming here today. And while typically we would encourage people to stay silent during a wedding, you can feel free to use the chat feature to comment, celebrate, do whatever you'd like.
But can you talk a little bit about how governments have been using it?
So one really clear example of this one very public example of this we saw was in the United Kingdom with Boris Johnson, who was unfortunately diagnosed with COVID-19 and then was conducting these cabinet meetings while in quarantine. And, there were all kinds of interesting things that happened with this, like when the screenshots of this meeting and the video clips from this meeting were publicized, you could very clearly read out the Zoom meeting ID, that 9-digit, 10-digit code that I mentioned that's required to join the meeting. I'm not sure if anyone actually tried crashing the meeting, but there was hopefully a password on there which would have made it somewhat more difficult to join. But I think there's an interesting consideration here, like if this cabinet meeting is being conducted on Zoom, well, presumably cabinet meeting is somewhat interesting for the foreign intelligence services out there that might want to see what's being talked about, see how the government's plans are unfolding. That would be something that they'd potentially be interested in intercepting. So it raises kind of an interesting question. Well, is this platform secure for this use? On the other hand, we've seen Zoom has a setup with the US government where apparently they've deployed a version of their Zoom app on a set of servers that are located in the United States, which are different than the regular Zoom servers and are somehow certified for government use. So the idea is that people who are communicating on this quote-unquote Zoom Gov app for the US government are potentially using a different set of servers than sort of mainline Zoom users, and perhaps the government has more insight there into what's going on.
So why did Zoom blow up like this, do you think? It seems like it's gotten more traction than some of the other video conferencing apps like House Party and even Google Hangouts. It feels like everything's being done on Zoom.
Well, I think from a business perspective, Zoom did a lot of things right. And one of those things was they focused very heavily on trying to make the app as easy to use as possible. For those of us out there who have used other video conferencing apps in the past, there's this kind of comical routine that inevitably happens where someone's video is off or their audio is muted or they can't get things to work properly or the video is out of focus or things are lagging. It makes it feel like the experience is not seamless. There's all these subtle ways in which problems with video conferencing apps can really, really negatively impact your experience as a user. And I think this was very smart of Zoom to realize that this is really what they need to focus on if they want their app to take off and become popular and make money, is they need to make the user experience absolutely seamless, absolutely painless, absolutely frictionless. And I think that's one of the things they get really right. But unfortunately, there are a lot of ways in which having a seamless, frictionless user experience are in conflict with security. If it's really, really easy and painless to join a meeting, well, then it's also easy for miscreants to join a meeting and you get Zoom bombing. Or, if you're making all these optimizations to make sure the video is absolutely seamless, how is that video being sent by Zoom servers? Is it being sent before the user's authorized to join the meeting, or is the authorization being implemented from a security perspective so that people who aren't authorized never get the video? So there's all these interesting questions where if you're really prioritizing user experience, you might make some trade-offs with security. And that's one of the things that we saw with Zoom.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of the security concerns around Zoom. Actually, a few weeks ago, I got an email from a friend of a friend. She works for a women's rights organization, and someone hijacked their Zoom event.
And then we got to the slide about our organization, and that's when everything just went off the wall.
She said it seemed strategic, like people had been waiting in the meeting to do this.
It started off with maybe 3-4 people just starting to scream, all sorts of profanity. The N-word was said repeatedly. There was also just blaring of loud music.
And it sounds like that's been happening a lot. There is actually a term for it. It's come to be known as Zoom bombing, which you just mentioned. Can you tell me a bit more about that? Who's doing it and who they're targeting?
Right. So Zoom bombing is essentially when someone joins your Zoom meeting who you don't want to be there and then behaves in a disruptive or offensive way in order to sabotage or crash the meeting. As you mentioned, we've seen a lot of instances of this where the Zoom bombers are, attempting to be very offensive or attempting to be racist or, attempting to be misogynistic or behave in these sort of very obnoxious ways to disrupt the meeting. It's essentially caused by someone who's able to join the meeting without the meeting host's permission. And you can do this because a lot of the features to prevent Zoom bombing are kind of a bit tough, perhaps, for the user to understand exactly how they work and how they interact with each other.
Yeah, and what are some of those features?
So Zoom offers a feature for this one feature called waiting rooms. And basically what that does is that, whenever anyone wants to join the meeting, they're first placed in a waiting room. And then the host of the meeting can periodically go and look and say, who's in the waiting room? Wait, I don't recognize that person. You can just kick them from the waiting room before they have the opportunity to join. There's also passwords, which might give you some additional security, because if someone figures out your 9-digit or 10-digit meeting ID, they'll also need a 6-digit password. And there's also other features like to prevent certain attendees from sharing video, or you can force people to be muted or have their cameras off, things like this. There's a fairly robust set of features there that you can use to prevent Zoom bombing. But again, the question is, are they intuitive? Are people really aware how to use these things properly? Or do they want to use them? Or do they, you can imagine with the waiting rooms, if I have a big meeting, if I'm teaching a class or something, do I really want to go through and it adds sort of an extra burden on the host to have to manually vet all the meeting attendees. So it's an interesting question, I think, do these features kind of match with how users want to use the app?
I should note that Zoom previously told Global News in a statement about Zoom bombing that they're, quote, deeply upset to hear about the incidents involving this type of attack. And Zoom also says it encourages hosts to review their settings, confirm that only the host can share their screen, and use features like mute controls and waiting room. We'll be right back. I know because of Zoom bombing, Zoom has already been banned in some places, right? I know Singapore, for example, has suspended the use of Zoom by teachers because of some incidents that happened during the first week of lockdown.
There have been several cases of, as you mentioned, both educational organizations or school districts or universities, or even in some cases governments, various ministries that have banned or have advised against Zoom. It's not always clear when a organization issues a ban, whether it's because of Zoom bombing or whether it's because of other issues or considerations or concerns with the app. We saw Google, which of course has their own meeting product, saying to its employees, please don't install the Zoom client on Google computers. It doesn't meet the security standards of Google. Or, we saw like some people involved in the security of the US Senate advised senators perhaps not to use Zoom, although there wasn't sort of an outright ban there.
Yeah.
But in addition to the Zoom bombing, there have been other security issues or deficiencies, because of course Zoom is the top app now. Everyone's using it, and you've got all these information security researchers confined to their couches who have nothing better to do. Everybody's sort of been looking at Zoom. There's been a series of security vulnerabilities revealed, not just this privacy issue with Zoom bombing, but also security issues in the app, which could be the reason for some of the other bans.
Yeah, it seems like it's been one thing after another. So let's talk about some of those other concerns. Can you just briefly take me through what those are before we get to end-to-end encryption, which is what Citizen Lab found problems with?
Yeah. Of course, Zoom bombing has been sort of the one on everyone's minds, but there's also been a few other security issues with Zoom. Last year, there was this fairly interesting security vulnerability in Zoom. Because Zoom, had this very aggressive emphasis on reducing the number of clicks that a user would have to use to join its app. So, when you were joining a Zoom meeting from your web browser, like Safari on your Mac, what would happen is there would be this pop-ups. When you click on the Zoom link, the pop-up would say, Safari wants to open Zoom, and then you'd click OK, and then Zoom would open. So one of the things they wanted to do was to reduce that click, so the user wouldn't see that warning and wouldn't have to click OK. So essentially, they created this hidden web server that they installed on people's computers. So they sort of installed this surreptitious code that was always running, even when you uninstalled Zoom, and could open up the Zoom app without clicking on it, without you seeing this warning, hey, Safari wants to open Zoom, and clicking OK. So by reducing this click, they opened this security vulnerability because other things could potentially hijack this web server and, run code on your computer that you didn't authorize. There was that issue last year. And then recently there's been several issues like that have a sort of similar flavor. So when you were installing Zoom on your Mac, when you typically install apps, it asks you for a password to authorize changes to your computer. But what Zoom was doing is they didn't want, I guess, the password pop-up to be seen while you were installing Zoom, because if you thought, oh, I got to type in my password, that would be a point where users might exit out of the install process, I guess. So what they did is they said, okay, we're not going to show the password prompt, but we're going to wait a little bit, and then later we'll show a password prompt that doesn't mention Zoom and just says, oh, the system needs your password, type in your password. So these sorts of interesting hacks that they came up with to reduce number of clicks and reduce the friction of installing the app and launching the app, in some cases cause security vulnerabilities. With the Zoom app, there was the potential for other apps to be able to hijack Zoom and use it to elevate their own privileges and do bad things on your computer. And then also there was the sort of research we did at Citizen Lab where we were looking at, well, how are Zoom calls actually encrypted? Are they using end-to-end encryption? Are they not?
And what does end-to-end encryption mean for people who don't know?
Yeah, so a lot of video chatting apps use, and voice chatting apps and meeting apps have an option at least for end-to-end encryption, which is an encryption system where the meeting is encrypted in such a way that only the authorized participants of the call or of the chat or of the video can see what's going on. They're the only ones who can decrypt and understand the contents of the meeting. That's contrasted with a system, like we say transport encryption, to mean that meeting content might be encrypted only between your computer and Zoom servers, whatever the meeting provider is that you're working with. And in that sense, in that sort of scheme, Zoom could decrypt the meeting. They could, see what was going on if they wanted to. No evidence that they were necessarily doing that. But on the other hand, it would mean that anybody who steals that encryption key could see and understand what was going on in the call or in the meeting. And this would be potentially a consideration for people who have heightened confidentiality requirements. So like a government exchanging classified information, there would be someone who'd be willing to take the time and investment in order to potentially intercept that meeting. So this issue of being able to decrypt the meeting with just this encryption key that you could potentially get from Zoom puts a huge target on Zoom.
And you guys found that these encryption keys were sometimes being generated in China, right? does that present an added risk that the Chinese government could pressure Zoom to decrypt these meetings?
Zoom says they've corrected this issue, and they've just released an update where users can sort of, I guess, configure which countries their meetings and their keys are routed through, so they could exclude China, I guess. Having encryption keys, stored in or sent through China does present a potential risk, either from the government sort of directly asking, and then, of course, in that case, there's a question, well, is Zoom going to say yes or no? But in addition to just the sort of, overt asking, you could imagine a case where the government wouldn't ask, and they would simply just try and hack into Zoom or get the keys some other way. One of the good things, I guess, is that Zoom, and in particular Zoom's CEO, seem to be very responsive to these concerns, at least in public, hiring a bunch of top security talent to his company to try and improve the security and privacy features of the app and to try and create sort of a new direction, a new focus for the company. So rather than, this relentless emphasis on speed, reducing number of clicks, reducing friction, improving user experience, the new direction is more, enhancing security and privacy, freezing all, non-security and privacy feature development to just focus on, improving the core security and privacy of the app. So I think that's very encouraging in terms of what we've seen so far. So if they can pull off this big improvement in security, I think it could be very exciting and very beneficial for users.
Yeah, but there are a lot of high-stakes meetings being conducted on Zoom right now, high-level government meetings, business meetings. How vulnerable are they in this moment? And is it a good idea to be having these types of meetings on something like Zoom?
There's been a lot of concern, I think, from ordinary or average users saying, oh, well, there's all these security issues in Zoom. Do I need to stop using it? Do I need to switch to another app? And I think, at least what we were able to figure out with this sort of encryption issue, that's really not something that I think that the average user would need to be concerned about. It's more, as you said, for these governments that are discussing maybe sensitive or classified information, companies that are discussing trade secrets that someone might want to steal, dissidents, journalists, potentially discussing things that the government would like to know about. These sorts of users, I think, at the moment should probably make sure that those secrets, those bits of sensitive information, are exchanged outside of Zoom, just because I think the way that they've implemented encryption at the moment, and again, they're improving it, but the way that they've implemented their encryption at the moment, I think puts a huge target on Zoom's back. So if I were exchanging these sorts of secrets over Zoom, I probably wouldn't exchange them over Zoom right now. But if you're the average user having beers, keep calm and Zoom on.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
All right, great chatting with you.
All right, that's the show. Thanks so much for listening. If you like this episode, please rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening. I'm Tamara Kandaker, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.